Robert Chen had built his restaurant empire from nothing, and at 62 years old he thought he had seen everything there was to see in the food business, but standing in the shadows of his flagship kitchen at 3 in the morning watching a young chef named Maya work with quiet intensity, he realized how wrong he had been. The security footage had shown unusual activity in the kitchen during the early morning hours, and Robert, being the hands-on leader he had always been, decided to investigate himself rather than sending his operations manager, so he arrived before dawn dressed in the navy uniform of a maintenance worker, complete with a cap pulled low over his silver hair. Maya didn't notice him at first, and she was completely absorbed in her work, and her knife moved with a rhythm that spoke of years of practice, and the vegetables fell into perfect uniform pieces, and there was something almost meditative about the way she worked, and Robert found himself transfixed. He had reviewed her file that afternoon, and Maya Rodriguez was 26 years old, and she had been with the company for 3 years, and she had started as a prep cook and worked her way up to sous chef, and her performance reviews were excellent. But what struck Robert most was a note from the head chef about her dedication, and it said she was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Robert cleared his throat gently, and Maya looked up, and her dark eyes showed surprise but not alarm, and she wiped her hands on her apron. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile that reached her eyes, "and I'm Maya, and you must be new, and are you here to check the refrigeration units?" Robert nodded, and trying to match her friendliness, "And yes, and Robert, and just Robert, and I'm doing rounds, and don't mind me, and you're here early." Maya laughed softly, and it was a sound like wind chimes, "And oh, and I'm always here early, and I prep the vegetables for the lunch service, and someone has to do it, and might as well be me." There was no resentment in her voice, and just a simple statement of fact, and Robert watched as she returned to her work, and her movements fluid and efficient, and after a moment he moved closer and pretending to check the temperature gauge on the walk-in cooler. "You do this every morning?" he asked. "Every morning," she confirmed, "and Monday through Saturday, and Sundays were closed, so I get to sleep in until 5. She said it with such genuine cheerfulness that Robert felt something tighten in his chest, and he had employees and hundreds of them, but when was the last time he had really seen them and truly understood what their lives were like? "Do you mind if I ask you something?" Robert said, and moving to lean against the counter where he could see her face. Maya looked up again, and her expression open and sure, and asked away. "Why are you here at 3 a.m.? And I mean, and the head chef doesn't arrive until 8, and the restaurant doesn't open until 11, and you could come in at 6 or 7 and still have everything done." Maya's hands paused for just a moment before resuming their steady rhythm, and her voice when she spoke was thoughtful and well, "And I guess there are a few reasons, and one is that I take the bus, and the early bus is less crowded and safer, and two is that my abuela and my grandmother, and she lives with me, and she wakes up around 4:30, and I like to have breakfast ready for her before I leave, and if I prep here first, and I can get home by 7 and spend the morning with her before her nurse arrives." Robert felt that tightness in his chest again. "And tell me about your grandmother." Maya's whole face lit up, and transforming her from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful, "And oh, an abuela, and she's everything, and she raised me after my parents died when I was 8. And she worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, and she cleaned offices, and she watched other people's children, and she took in sewing, and she never complained, and not once, and she always said that hard work was its own reward, and that if you did something, and you should do it with your whole heart." "And now," Robert said quietly. "Now she has Parkinson's," and Maya said, and her voice steady, but Robert could hear the emotion underneath, "and she can't work anymore, and she can barely walk some days, and but her mind is sharp, and she still wants to know everything about my day, and she asks about the recipes I'm learning and the techniques I'm practicing, and she's so proud." Robert was silent for a moment, and watching Maya's skilled hands transform a pile of tomatoes into perfect concasse. "And did you ever think about culinary school?" he asked, "and I mean formal training." Maya smiled, and a little sadly this time, "And all the time, and I got accepted to the Culinary Institute and full scholarship based on merit, and it was my dream, and but then abuela got sick and someone needed to be there, and the scholarship couldn't wait, and dreams can." "But you're still cooking," Robert said. "I'm still cooking," Maya agreed, "and maybe not the way I imagined, and but I'm learning, and Chef Thomas and the head chef here, and he's been wonderful, and he teaches me everything, and he gives me cookbooks, and he lets me practice new dishes during my prep time, and he says I have real talent." She said this last part almost shyly, and as if she wasn't quite sure she should believe it. Robert felt something shift inside him, and something he couldn't quite name. "And he's right," he said, "and I can tell just from watching you work, and you have something special." Maya's eyes glistened. "And thank you, and that means more than you know." They worked in companionable silence for a while, and Robert actually helping her prep vegetables, and his own knife skills rusty but serviceable, and the kitchen gradually lightened as dawn approached, and painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Tell me about your best day here, Robert said. Maya didn't even have to think about it, and last month and Chef Thomas let me create a special for the dinner service, and it was my abuela's recipe for ropa vieja, but I made it my own and added some things I'd learned here, and it sold out in every single order. And in the next day and Chef Thomas told me 3 different customers had asked for the recipe, and she paused and her voice soft, and I took a picture of the dish and I brought it home to show abuela, and she cried and she said my mother would have been proud. Robert had to look away for a moment and his own eyes burning. And what did your mother do, he asked when he trusted his voice. She was a teacher, Maya said, in 3rd grade, and she used to say that teaching was about planting seeds and you might not see them grow, but you had to trust that they would, and I think about that a lot, and abuela planted seeds in me, and now I'm trying to plant seeds in the food I make. And does that sound silly? Not at all, Robert said, and his voice rough, and not at all. The kitchen was fully light now, and the first sounds of the city awakening drifting through the ventilation system, and Maya glanced at the clock and oh, and I should start on the stocks, and she said, and then caught herself, but you probably have other equipment to check. Robert stood and straightening his borrowed uniform, and Maya, he said, and what if you could go to culinary school, and what if someone could help make that happen? Maya's expression was gentle and kind and a little sad, and that's sweet, but life doesn't work that way, and not for people like me, and I'm okay with that, and really, and I have abuela, and I have this kitchen, and I have food to cook in. That's more than enough. But what if, Robert pressed. Maya reached out and patted his arm, and a gesture so naturally compassionate that Robert felt his throat tighten. And you're a good man, and Robert the maintenance worker, but some dreams change shape, and that's okay, and maybe I won't go to the culinary institute, but I'm still becoming a chef, and just on a different path, and abuela taught me that the destination matters less than the journey, and in how you treat people along the way. Robert nodded and unable to speak, and Maya smiled at him once more and then returned to her stocks and humming softly to herself, and Robert watched her for another moment and then quietly left the kitchen. 3 weeks later, and Maya arrived for her usual 3 a.m. shift to find an envelope taped to her locker, and inside was a letter on company letterhead, and it informed her that she had been awarded the newly established Chen Family Scholarship for Culinary Excellence, and it would cover her tuition at any culinary school she chose and provide a generous living stipend, and most importantly, and it included funding for home health care for her grandmother, and 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Maya read the letter 3 times and her hands shaking, and then she noticed a smaller note paper clipped to the back, and the handwriting was distinctive and elegant. Dear Maya, I met a maintenance worker once who taught me that the best leaders are those who show up early and work hard and never ask for recognition, and you remind me why I fell in love with this business in the first place, and it was never about the accolades or the empire, and it was always about the food and the people and the love that goes into every dish. Your grandmother was right, and hard work is its own reward, but sometimes, and if we're lucky, and hard work is also seen and valued and celebrated. The scholarship is yours and no strings attached, and go to school and learn everything you can, and then come back and teach us what you've learned, and or don't come back and open your own restaurant, and either way, and know that you've already succeeded in the most important way, and you've stayed true to yourself and your values and your love for your grandmother and your craft. The world needs more people like you. With deepest respect, Robert Chen. P.S. And I've arranged for Chef Thomas to take over your morning prep duties, and he's excited about the early hours and something about the peace and quiet, and I think you taught him something too. Maya stood in the quiet locker room, and tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in years, and she let herself imagine a future that included all her dreams and not just the practical pieces of them. That morning she took the bus home at 7 as usual, and the envelope clutched in her hands, and when she walked into their small apartment, and her grandmother was already awake and sitting in her chair by the window, and the early light making a halo of her white hair. Abuela, Maya said, and her voice breaking, and something wonderful happened. Her grandmother smiled, and her hands trembling but her eyes bright and clear, and tell me everything, mija, and tell me every single detail. And Maya did, and sitting at her grandmother's feet and holding her shaking hands and talking and laughing and crying, and in that moment and she understood what her grandmother had always known. That kindness ripples outward in ways we cannot predict, and that hard work done with love never goes unnoticed, and that sometimes and when we least expect it, and the universe conspires to help us, and not because we demanded it, but because we never stopped believing in the quiet dignity of showing up and doing our best and treating others with compassion. And that morning, and in a small apartment in a city just waking up, and 2 women held each other and cried and laughed, and a grandmother who had sacrificed everything and a granddaughter who had inherited her strength, and both of them learning once again that love and persistence and grace can transform even the smallest acts into something extraordinary. Because that is the magic of kindness, and it doesn't announce itself and it doesn't demand recognition, and it simply shows up at 3 a.m. and chops vegetables and then waits patiently for the world to notice, and when someone finally does, and it changes everything.